Hey everyone. Today I just want to go over I guess some sort of tutorial idea of how to go about putting together like a motorbike helmet or a full headed helmet. Um, this isn't exactly the ideal way to go about it because I've never modeled up a motorcycle helmet before. But some of you students said, could we do this? And it doesn't bother me what kind of helmet you really go with as long as you're learning some interesting skills. Um, However, it's not the ideal way to do it. I'm sure there's much more professional ways to go about this, but we're not looking at professional detailing and CAD modeling for production. We're looking at getting shapes that look mostly right for communication, visualizing our ideas. As you can see down the bottom here on my timeline, it is quite a mess. There is a lot of stuff going on, and we're just going to go and sort of roll through it, and I'll point out some interesting details as we go. Part of this is Dustin and I talk about iterative design, so model it once, see how it goes, then do it again better. This is my first attempt. I probably spent about I don't know, maybe about 4 hours on this. It's not really based on anything directly. In fact, for inspiration, I looked at obviously standard motorbike helmets, so something really basic. If that wants to load up, something quite basic that just straight as shape there, some sort of contour across here, and a visor, standard stuff. And then for the other sort of inspiration, I actually looked at a helmet from a video game, Doom, just for these weird air intake things. Again, I don't really know anything about motorbike helmets, so I wanted mine to look a bit different. So I took the idea of a little top vent and the side vents into something that might be like some sort of race helmet. Anyway, so let's go through it from the very start. And what you can do to go through your design, which is really good for your folios. One of the problems in the last assignment with the folios is there wasn't enough detailing of each individual step. Not that we want to see every single step, but what you can do is go back to the start here and progress through it, take a screenshot, write down some annotations for it in the specific areas. And going through it this way does help you. It's almost like, well, going back in the timeline is going back in time, right? And it's about, at this point in time, I was thinking this, or I had modeled this, and, see how that changes throughout it. So, what I did to save some time, I just copied my original skate helmet that we spent some time modeling around or messing around with this in class just to add the visor in. It already had the head imported, and it had a basic sort of form on top of the head spaced out already. So yours should at least be at this point by now, with a good shape, some sort of basic helmet going. And, like we say, we want you to model things a couple times. Obviously, this is quite silly, but all I did was copy, and you just copy it to the same folder, hit copy, and then you rename it. What I then did was delete everything after this second step, just so that meant I already had the head roughly in shape where I wanted it. I had part of the top spaced off, so it was really easy to just go in and start from there. So if you've got resources, if you've done some work already, take what you can. And yeah, again, so some of these forms aren't exact. It's not perfect, but we're going to work with it because it's about the processes. So if we go into edit my form, you can see that I've actually got this vent modeled in on top. However, is really important, right? Get your main form, get it right, something that fits over the head, and then copy it. So, I should be going through renaming these, but this was just me going rough. And you want to rename that to like your main form or something like that. Okay. So once you're at this point, you can copy it, say, yes, I'm happy with the form, the proportions are all good. And then when you go in to add the details, so like this scoop on the top, you can actually do that in a way where you won't ruin your original form by accident. we can see that if I just copy, what I will do is copy this body over and position it to the side so we can compare them. So looking at these two, you can see they're pretty much the same except for this top section. And if I just go to box mode with Alt-1, we can see I've added in this scoop and it actually comes down quite far on the inside. To go about adding something like this, what we need to do is put a split between, well, where this meets up here. We need to split this and pull some of these up. There is a few ways you can do that, so let's have a look on the side here. If we want, we can just go, you know, there's modified unweld edges. Sometimes that'll work right. Like there, and we can see that now we've got this line here. So what you have to do then is actually start moving things around to see what happens. So if you ever see weird shapes in your, or weird contours, there's something going on there. So if we grab this and pull it out, we can see it's starting to open it up as a vent or something like that. But, you know, it's not exactly perfect. Maybe we need some more lines through here. So we can select across here, insert edge. Maybe we want it on both sides. I don't know why that's adding a line there. Let's see what happens. Okay, so just kind of ignored that extra line. That's fine. And we can go about actually pulling these out to open up this vent a bit more. One of the things is like, okay, so that's starting to look alright, looking like a vent. And this is really pretty much all I did, alright? We can see this has these sort of areas and it comes down to a point here. So I think what I actually did on that was a bit different. If I Control Z back through here, instead of splitting it off, I selected a couple faces and Alt dragged them out. And what that does is it gives it the side and the back where it sticks out. And then I just came in and deleted the front. So there's a couple ways to go about it. This tends to sort of pinch it in a bit more and gives you more control on the side here. So you can then drag them in slightly. And you can see the differences where it doesn't blend in on the back as much, but you know, these are the kind of things you really need to experiment with. Which is the best way? What does it add? What does it, you know, which works better? Like, so this one doesn't blend into the main form as much, but it gives me more control on the side. From there, when we have something like at this point, what we would look at is selecting the ring, and we have to bring it inwards. So we want to give it a sort of front face and then start offsetting inwards. So to do that, we can play around with these, which are the scale options. We've never really gone over them in detail, but if you drag it, it scales that way. And if you drag it, it scales that way. But what we can do is, well, both directions as well. But if we hold in Alt, what that's going to do is pull that face in that direction. And this is a really good time to swap between box mode and normal because it doesn't do it in proportion, like as a proper offset. So you'll probably have to come down less than you go up or something like that. And obviously you can go ahead and tweak all these. It gives it a bit more of a flat there, but it really actually starts to look like the correct sort of form when you then select this face and drag another one inwards. So just holding in Alt and dragging. If you pull it really far in, it does blend it quite well, but then you get like a real tight pinch up here. So, you know, you might have to drag it very short, give it a little bit of detail there, and then pull it back more, and then pull it back more. And it's a bit thicker and sharper up here. You can then come through and select these and scale them a bit more if you want and get some control out of it. So there's all these different ways of going about it, blending that in. In fact, you know, I think this is actually probably blended in a bit better than this one up the top, but that's fine. So yeah, that's how I go about putting in like some sort of vent on the side. Well, really that's one way of going about it, because what I'm going to do is just get out of all that. So revert back to before that even existed, because I want my timeline to stay intact. And again, like, I don't know how far to space off a helmet from the head. It doesn't really matter as long as it kind of looks right. Obviously, for you, you want it to look really convincing. But if it's gonna take you 2 hours to figure out exactly how it fits on a head, I'd rather you spend 2 hours playing around with the tools and seeing what you can get out of it. So, you know, just make it kind of look convincing. The shape's relatively smooth. It can be really difficult to get these looking right. And when I pull down this vent, I just made sure to pull it down quite far inside, because what we're going to do is cut it through the foam later on. So just hiding the body, we have 2 bodies here, as you can see. The main form, which we're going to use as a reference later for offsetting, and the top hat, and you can see where they're different. So moving forward in the steps, what we did was thicken that form in just about 15 mil like we did with the standard helmets. And what that did is, you know, just give us our sort of foam base, I think. From there, we just want to trim the bottom again because the offsetting never really gives us anything smooth. So when you make your model, you know, stretch it out a bit further. Then what I went about doing was creating another offset just on the top. So I was going to be using the main body again. At this point, I wanted to extend it down a bit. And just to keep this as a reference for cutting out the inside. And here we have a split, which I just used to split that bottom surface off so we could get rid of it and clean up the edge when this gets removed. So coming through here, I trimmed up all these surfaces here, and I just want them all clean, so I just split them and deleted by using right click and remove. If you use delete, it kind of kills everything in the timeline that references it. In remove, it just says at this point in the timeline, we're just going to take that body away from it. So don't get confused between remove and remove and delete. Make sure to remove it if you just don't want it there and you're not going to reference it later. Next, I actually started looking at how we're going to add detail to this. So if we're thinking about motorcycle helmets, they have a lot of contours going on, and it is incredibly hard to control those contours while playing around in the sort of freeform workspace. So I thought I would just do it in the modeling workspace. So it's just a matter of drawing in some contours you like or think suitable. I tried to draw in the visor as well. And you can just go about splitting up the faces, like right here on the main body. Actually, no, it wasn't on the main body. It was on the one of these copied ones. So again, name your things as you go through. Okay, so it's on the one that has a scoop on it, and I split the face here, and I just go through and split it up in a couple more sections, put the visor on, put this back section on. Again, split face, not split body, because I don't want to turn it into a separate part. And from there, I actually just thought, well, if I want this contour along this line, there needs to be a difference in the surface. So I went through and used the push-pull to just slightly start giving some difference in the structure to the helmet. And going through again, yeah, just thicking that up a bit more. Drawing in another line. What was this one? This was from the top. I don't think I actually used that later on. That might just be there. Anyway, doesn't matter. Like I said, it's all rough. And then I just went through and filleted this. So Fusion, the good thing is you can get away with large fillets that completely cover the edge. So, you know, now it looks like a purposeful actual contour across the whole helmet. Maybe it's for structure, who knows. And then I just ran a fillet on the outer edge there that we created. So now we've actually got a pretty decent transition from one surface to the other. You know, it's curvature or tangent there, and then it rolls into that one. So to try and model something like that in the freeform workspace is kind of a nightmare, because you want all your lines coming in a consistent orientation. like this to then pull these out, pull that up, and go across and get it looking right. I originally tried that. I didn't have any luck with it. If you do, tell me, because it would be a pretty cool way to do it. From there, I added another freeform. So this is where I started to get into this sort of idea of like a weird vent air intake coming around the front. And yeah, I just simply started with a little cylinder, dragged it out, got something kind of there. It's not really square or anything. If we look in the box mode, we can see this would probably be better if it was evened out. I'm not going to touch any of it at the moment, just in case my timeline breaks. But yeah, it was starting out with something like that. If we can find where it's gone, down here, and you know, just all right, that's kind of where I want my things to intersect. I did actually have a lot of trouble with this. This was one of the trickier parts to figure out of like, how do we intersect this? Because I also wanted it to go through the foam when we had, cut out through the foam, cut out through this hard shell of the plastic, the plastic as well. So rolling through a bit more, I added in some sketches, which are just a line here to trim back some stuff maybe from the front, and then I added in this to do the visor. So as you can see, I was kind of all over the place where I wanted to split this up to create that sort of area where the glass sits on the inside. Moving forward, I went about doing offsetting the glass here. So yeah, like I said, my focus shifted to the visor, and it was about getting that visor shape there and then splitting it. Did I split that there? Maybe. Okay, yeah, so that was just to get the visor going. I'm not sure where that split was, to be honest. Okay, it was on one of those faces, but then yeah, just sticking it out to get the visor, and obviously that's pretty simple, because if you split it and thicken the visor out, you get it exactly where you want it. And looking at that with the main head, you can see it comes up pretty flush. So moving forwards from here, this is when I started to, what did I do there? This is where we got into some more surfacing stuff. As we can see, there's a lot of stitching going on. Right, so this is where on the main body, if we go back by one, we already have the visor made in front of this. So obviously we don't want a solid piece of material there, but we need something for the visor to pivot off. So this helmet absolutely doesn't work, by the way. Like, these edges I extruded out here completely keep the visor captive, so there's no way it's going to pivot, but it doesn't matter because you might not notice that looking at it, and that's how I get away with stuff. So then it was just a matter of deleting that, so now we can kind of get that idea that this is where the visor pivots around. Yeah, and I just offset these faces to keep them separate from the main body. Just, essentially to copy them so I can thicken them out later. Trimmed them away from the main body, but, I still have one here. So when we thicken this in later, depending on, I didn't know which way the body was going to thicken or how that was all going to work. I just wanted that on its own, because I thought I might make it a separate material or blend it into the foam. Here, I was actually starting to look at how we join how do we make a solid volume out of something that's just surfaces. So what I did was created a loft between an inside shape. So this was just one of those offsets. I'd cut the visor mark out of it, and I just ran a loft between these two faces here. So there to there. And then I did the same down the bottom. So right here down the bottom, these are open, and I ran a loft there. From there, the problem is they're still separate bodies, so you can click through them and see they're not connected. I ran the stitch. So in SolidWorks, it's called knitting surfaces, if you've done that before. And when you open it up, it's just a matter of selecting the bodies, the surfaces, sorry, and if they connect and there's enough tolerance set, it'll blend them all together and make a solid out of it. Now, it did kind of weirdly glitch up in this area up here. It says it's a solid, but obviously there's still part of a surface here sticking out. I just kind of ignored that. for the moment. And then I went ahead and just came back to figuring out how to cut this shape through the main body. I extended it a bunch because I was going to cut it at a weird angle. I then thickened it. So the thing is, thickening anything with any cylinder that's got like a not round face, it kind of does these weird contours, and obviously you don't want that. So it was just a matter of playing around with how I was then going to trim that back, and I, experimented with some weird options here. Offsetting the face and trimming it, but then that leads to it having this really huge opening. I then looked at, what did I do here? Pretty much the exact same thing, offsetting only one of the parts to it and just playing around. Yeah, and so again, all over the place. This is even slightly confusing for me to go through, but it's okay. Where is this fillet? All right, so here what I did was, I thought, all right, I'll cut it at a curve. So let's just go back through those steps again. I offset the face, I deleted a face here just to make it end like that. And because I wanted it to protrude outwards, I ran a surface extend. And I told it to be perpendicular. So instead of extending the surface out that way, you can make it come out perpendicular. And by doing that and running a fillet, oops, oh no. Okay, so you can actually hit this button to play through it, which is pretty useless. Running a fillet just to blend that out like that. But I didn't end up I wasn't happy with how that ended up, so I just kind of scrapped the idea. And I decided to just cut it straight. Sometimes you just got to go with something simple, because I was spending way too much time trying to figure out how to do all this stuff, and I realized, well, it actually wasn't important for the time being. So I just cut it straight. And yeah, as you can see, like we saw the twisty box part, it should be straighter, it should look a bit neater. Doesn't really matter. From here, what I did was I offset the face inwards. So this is only slightly offset inwards, and I just wanted to make sure when I cut out this solid part of the helmet, there's heaps of stuff for this to grab onto, and I'll show you what that is in a second. So I run the split body command, and what that did was, if I can show, I ran this shape that is offset outwards slightly through the main part of the helmet, and that split the helmet into this section here, which we've got this inner area, which is really nicely cut out, and it just, we've got that front bit, but whatever, that doesn't matter. Where is it? Okay, and so the inner part. So then, of course, it was a matter of just removing that inner part using remove. I also removed some other weird bits and pieces here and there. And then it was a matter of combining this section. So the reason I did that offset was to ensure that there was plenty of surface contact, and sometimes it can get a bit weird with surfaces that are cut flat against each other and then joining them back in. So what I'm going to do is just run a section analysis to show you what I was thinking. So if we have a look here, we can see this offset I ran, which I then deleted, cut the helmet area within the tube, within the extendable tube air intake thing, right? So the reason I did that is at no point is this edge going to protrude from the inside here, or it's going to end up flush and try and blend them together. It's just going to be on the inside, it's going to turn into nothing, and when they combine in the next step, it's just seamless, right? We've got this nice blend in here and in there. I don't know if that's entirely necessary all the time. It might just be paranoia and flashbacks from doing stuff in SolidWorks and even Fusion, but you want to make sure these sections join together smoothly, which they do. I think it's kind of cool to see that. So let's say we have that. The next step was to then, I think it was to split away this inside bit, which I did somewhere. Oh, hold on. Yeah, going through the next command. And what I used here is my, original offset, the original shape of the helmet, not the scoop or anything, just the basic one that I copied all the way back because I knew I'd need it later. And I used it to trim against everything that's on the inside, right? And so that just cleaned out that inside bit, which is now here, just a split body. And with that gone, we've got a real seamless transition. This blends in here. This is flat. There's no weird jankiness. And from here, it was just a matter of running some fillets around these inner surfaces in here. And then I actually started to look at rounding out the inner foam areas of the helmet. So at this point, I was pretty happy with the form I had. Everything was looking good. This vent was really painful to implement. There might have been a better way to do it, especially after just showing you how to do that one. I could have done something similar to that. But yeah, like this weird bit here, I hadn't even figured out why that had happened. So I just went through, rounded some things out, and eventually we start to get into some more features. So over here, what I started to look at was how do I separate the foam area from the new plastic. And what I simply did was offset the whole inner body, that main one, our master body, by -1, right? So the idea was to add a thickness to everything on the outside of -1, and just to make sure, what I had to do was extend it down past the bottom. So a lot of times when you offset something inwards, it doesn't quite protrude through, and you don't want to use the extend feature. You want to control it as much as possible. So that's what I did. I just extended that down. I then split the body, so now we can have a good look at it. And we can see that this inner surface is separate from the outer surface. I'll turn on that section analysis again. And yeah, we can see that we've got this, even like the top here split. It worked out really well. I think it looks pretty cool. How we've got these surfaces all split up. If I can adjust that. Some of these areas end up being thicker, which is fine because that's kind of how it actually ends up being. And yeah, you can just see, like, at minimal, we've got a 1 mil 1 mil part thickness here, which is probably fine. Not a problem to have 1 mil in any section. If it ends up being like 0.2 mil, you probably need to increase some offsets. But yeah, it gives us these interesting parts. And looking at this, we've got this, like, the geometry here is starting to get really complex. I can't think of any other easier ways to sort of go about modeling something up like this. So moving on, moving on, let's turn off that section analysis. I just blended in this outside edge here. Simple enough. Didn't like that it was sharp. Blended it in. And again, rounded the inside edges. So this was starting to, like we looked when we were doing the regular type of helmet. We want to start blending out our areas so it doesn't look so sharp. So this was just a chamfer on this face. And, it does actually make, let me just hide this sketch. It does actually make quite a big difference. So instead of just being flat and standard, it actually looks like I've thought about it. It's a contour. It moves away from the face. And here was, what was I doing here? I was just playing around with some stuff that I don't think I ended up using. Trimming these bodies. Yeah, so I was having some issues actually getting these to blend into the body correctly. So I had to scale and offset them a bit. It's not a really big deal, but essentially it was just thickening it because I had this weird transition with these lines. And eventually I realized, again, I was wasting too much time on something that's kind of simple and not really that important to you or me. So yeah, just more playing around. And here I actually started to look at how I'm going to blend this top body in, because, well, it says it's a solid body, but it's not. There's this weird thing sticking out here. So what I did was offset the inner section of it, ran a split command. Oops, wrong one. Offset the inner section of this, so if I just isolate that for a second, you can get that, and then unisolate, extend it down a bit, or up. So right now I'm not dealing with the main shell, I'm literally just dealing with cutting out that foam bit. And then, you know, just trimming it up to make sure it actually works right. Has a hole in it. That goes all the way through. So that was weird. Fusion didn't enjoy that. It was kind of odd. I can't explain why it happened that way. So this is where I would be noting stuff down in my folio, right? Again, just kind of removing some bodies as we go through. We're kind of getting there towards the end of it. This is where we just start cleaning things up. I guess I was playing around with materials at this point. Splitting more bodies out. I think I just touched up some areas around here where I wanted it to blend a bit better. Offset and split. Yeah, so I was just cleaning up the inside. That looks completely crazy. It was just to sort of re-clean up the inside face there a bit, but I can't even recall if that was really important or not. Again, going through, just adding in some more fillets again. Yeah, I think I wasn't happy with some of these fillets, so I came back and redid them and blended them in a bit better. Not really important. Deleted some things I didn't need by removing them down here. Added in just a very basic sketch to go about putting in a little pivot hinge looking thing. Simple enough. Created a line down here, made them equal, so it ended up in the center, mostly, because it's not really round. And then let's show this, the visor. What I wanted to do was just, you know, I split that face, offset it, and thickened it outwards. So it actually protruded past the body. You know, it's not actually flat. It should be like a solid straight piece. It's slightly contoured, but that doesn't really matter, again, for this point. And then just rounding out the inside and outside edges and running a combine to cut a hole out. So right now the visor's solid, and after a couple combines, it ends up being... Oh, was I doing it on this side? I can't really tell. But it was in order to, yeah, like here, down there, we've got the cutout now, so it all blends up nicely and sits against the face, removing a lot of unnecessary stuff, extra bodies and surfaces I had. So now everything's starting to clean up. So it is probably useful for you when you're going through it to just get rid of some stuff that you don't need, because, well, I think we all get pretty confused. Again, I was always keeping this original surface. I was never going to get rid of that because it is pretty useful. Glass, I can't even remember now if I even did split the glass. Maybe I missed it. Where was this? What did I do here? Down here, I just ran a split halfway through. So obviously at this point, it's pretty easy to notice that the left side's detailed and the right isn't, or the right isn't and left isn't, depending. So I actually just split it down the middle, removed the sides I didn't want, and mirrored everything. Also, these side, you know, cross sections look really cool at this point, especially up here. I think that's quite neat. So then, yeah, it was just a matter of remirroring it and using the combine feature to join the correct areas together, like that. You know, the most of the changes at this point are now just texturing. I ran a fillet somewhere, just down the bottom, just to, you know, like we talk about getting these really cool part lines showing up. I think, okay, so this is just like a type of rubber foamy texture that I wanted, and a little metallic paint on there. Going through, I added in, where was that? Okay, so up the top here, this is one of the problems you get when you're doing the freeform stuff. It's not very easy to just texture faces when you're applying decals, or applying materials, because, you know, the surfaces do this. So what I had to do was add in a sketch and split this face up in order to correctly texture this to make it look a little bit better. If I could find my piece. So right now it does that, and just before that split it did that. So it's like little differences, you know. This would probably be a little separate part, so you know, ideally you would want to run a little pipe, or you know, you can make little mini part lines by going to pipe and selecting sections and just running. It's being very painful here. One of the things you can do that I found out is playing around with selecting priorities, so you can get away with selecting edges. It doesn't want to select that other edge, maybe they're not touching properly. But you can do something like that, and if you go to the section size of like 0.1, yeah, okay, so that's going to glitch out or something. And you go okay. This might actually work. Yeah, so that's just applying the wrong texture in that spot. So what I'll just do is grab this, go to face, metal flake there, metal flake there. And so you can get these little mini part lines going. You know, and if you make that black, obviously not red, I just can't be bothered selecting each individual one. When you go through to render and actually run the in canvas render, those areas do start to darken out depending on the scene. I think this is a really bright scene at the moment, so yeah, it's not going to do it, but like, you know, just showing those little part lines in detail can be really helpful, and blending those areas in, like over here in the timeline, it still has that weird point out here, and you wouldn't actually have a part that does that. So I'm just going to stop that and go back. I'm going to delete that pipe feature because we don't need it, and I'm just going to roll that to the end where we're all happy and finished. And there's one last offset somewhere that I'm not sure what that does either. So what's that doing? That's trying to figure something out and probably apply the materials as I had them. So yeah, look, I put this together. Usually I don't think we do motorbike helmets, but because a couple of students were asking, I thought it would be a good idea to do that. This part of it, the whole doing a motorcycle helmet, is really on you. You know, I can help and support with the other stuff a lot easier, but for this one, a lot of it's going to be how you push your skills and put something together. I think it's come out, you know, relatively good for a couple hours. So you go back, you figure out other ways to do it. I would completely redo these. This was a massive headache. And, you know, you can get some better colors in. I personally think it renders up really well in black. So you want to go through and apply decals to faces. So what we can do is, you know, replace some of these around going to metal flakes or whatever it is. Paint, metal flake. So yeah, you want to use these downloaded ones, come up really well. The standard metallic ones are a bit average, I find. So you can just replace specific sections if you just drag something over it. So, you know, dark grey there. Sometimes you get weird errors about that. I tend to ignore a lot of the errors. That way they don't bother me as much. And I want like that dark black to be... Is it that one? No, it's not that one. So sometimes it's a bit awkward to organize all your materials still. Okay, so obviously I didn't want it on the inside there. This is just annoying me now at this point. So we can, nope, it's not going to tell us. So sometimes you got to play around. Yeah, okay, so that's definitely the one we want. I wish there was better ways to label all this and go through it, but yeah, maybe I'll do a short tutorial on how to go through and do stuff in VRED, because I think that generally gives cooler stuff anyway. But, you know, you can get some really cool looks going on. If you're using the metallics, just make sure you get the flake size right as well. So the flake size on these is huge, and you just bump it down a couple. It doesn't seem to scale linearly. Like you want it, something like that. And then in the dark gray areas, like they're actually really large here. So you just bring it down. Even something like that's fine. Like that, and then you can actually start to look at rendering it. Right now I'm using like this desert scene because it gives a really cool reflection on the helmet. Like that cut across there and the background there is really nice. Again, we want you to think of some really interesting ways to render this up. But this is some sort of introduction into how you could go about modeling up a helmet. It is really intimidating to try and model something up like this. I've never done it before. I feel pretty confident that I could do it again better. And yeah, and then you get glass on sections here, and you want to get some darkness going, or however it works to not super dark, but sometimes you can render them up like that. And a bit darker on the inside looks cool. Play around with your scene, because like right now this would look fine if I was rendering with a desert background, but obviously a lot of the time you just want to get that sort of product shot. That's coming up too dark, so we can play around with the brightness. Yeah, but then sometimes you get the weird reflection. So another problem I saw with a lot of submissions is these highlights and elements here, they're a bit strong, or they were a bit strong in some of the glasses. So like part of the glasses was literally just seeing these lights. And generally you don't want to see the lights too much in the reflection. It's obviously really tough to figure out, but you just want to try and show it in a way that you don't get the lights in too much. So you can play around. Sometimes using like a photo booth has much softer lighting. Play around with the brightness, and then once you actually export it to a high quality level, you go in and adjust it in Photoshop to get the actual levels quite right. But then something like this, where it's just like that highlight line, is generally quite fine. Not really a problem in terms of, hey, I see a highlight in the rendering is not bad at all, but seeing what's clearly a studio light in the rendering is a bit average. But anyway, thanks for watching through that. Hopefully it can help. I really want people, if they're interested in things like a motorbike helmet or pardon me, or like a firefighting helmet or something like that, if you don't know how to start or are really concerned, shoot me an email. I'll probably put together a video so it can help out everyone. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you all online in class soon.